Welcome to Voice It, a podcast showcasing people in the Clare Valley in the mid-north of South Australia who've started their own businesses from scratch and have turned them into success stories. This is a chance for them to tell you their story. I'm your host, Annabelle Homer.
I just remember in the troopy full of young people, we were camped on a red sand dune with a view over sort of Uluru, watching the sunset just out in the scrub. I was sitting there and I thought, I cannot believe that you can get paid for this. I cannot believe how good this is and that you could possibly have a job doing this. And, you know, I knew that this is it. This is what I need to be doing.
Meet Tim Grigg, the man behind Travelwild Australia, a tour company offering four-wheel drive experiences across the wilds of the Kimberley, South Australia's Outback and Flinders ranges, to the more pleasurable, slower-paced walking tours through rolling hills and vineyards in the Clare Valley. Tim grew up in Mildura in Victoria. He eventually moved to South Australia to pursue a career in industrial design, but he always had an itch to be in the bush. So he decided to scratch it, approached a company who ran tours to Alice Springs, and from that moment, he was hooked. In this episode, Tim takes you through the highs and the lows of starting a tour company, from not making any money with his first tours to Kangaroo Island to constantly fixing up trucks in the Kimberley, navigating the GFC and COVID, and pivoting the company out of bankruptcy. This is not just a business story, it's a love story too, as Tim met his now wife Bianca, a young backpacker from Holland, in his first 6 months as a tour guide, and they've been touring together ever since. Enjoy this fascinating behind-the-scenes journey of the unglamorous world of tourism.
Most of my childhood was spent in Mildura. My parents were from Melbourne and they moved out to the country, I suppose. They had a stint where they did that. For them was about 15 years, I suppose.
Why did they move to Mildura?
I think for opportunities. My father was a solicitor, my mum was a nurse, and I think there was great opportunities, perhaps, you know, if you move out to the regions. So Dad wanted to start his own business, I guess, and so he did that. He had a practice in Mildura. That coincided with me turning up, and so most of my childhood was spent there in Mildura.
And this is around the 1960s?
Yeah, I was born in 1967, so this was like the 70s, early 80s, I guess, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I've got 3 sisters and a brother.
So where do you come in that mix?
Second last. So I've got two older sisters, an older brother and a younger sister.
So what was life like in Mildura growing up with all that clan?
Hot. A lot of freedom, I suppose. A lot of time spent on the pushy, just riding around. A lot of time in the river, just hanging out with other boys, making jumps for your bike and swimming and rope swings in the river. And
oh, sounds idyllic.
yeah, really lovely. Very peaceful and very free, you know. It was great.
So what were you like as a kid? How would your parents describe you, for example? Were you confident? Were you shy?
No, pretty shy, I think, and pretty nerdy, I guess.
Really?
But always curious, inquisitive, I think. I went down to school in Melbourne when I was 14. By the time I'd finished school, they'd pretty much moved back to Melbourne.
So where did you go to school in Melbourne?
Scotch College.
Also, is that considered quite an exclusive school?
I think so. It's one of those ones, yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about your schooling years. Scotch College. I mean, how did you find that, moving away from home, boarding school, all that jazz?
Look, you've obviously, you know, very young, out of home. You develop some independence at a very young age. You grow up very quickly, I think. And, you know, those days are probably similar now, I guess, but you're really just thrown in the deep end and you've just got to sort it out, you know, especially socially. It's always, you know, it's a difficult time of your life, isn't it, when you're that age, working stuff out socially and where you fit, and, you know, coming from little town to the big city. I think it gave you perhaps a real sense of purpose to perhaps try and get yourself sorted for what was to come as an adult, I guess. You're not just sort of cruising along. You've been sent away to school, so do your best and get yourself sorted, sort of thing, you know. Yeah. Not saying that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't, but there's a sense of purpose to it.
How did you go at school?
I was very average student, just very average.
Really?
Yeah.
Even though you said you were nerdy?
Yeah, and so I was smart.
I just presumed if you're nerdy, you're smart. Isn't that funny? I just made that correlation.
I'm not on any honour boards.
after school? Tell us about what happened to Tim once you graduated from school. You said you're an average student. What did you want to do?
Look, I had no idea, really. I spent a year, would you call it a gap year these days? I didn't really know what I wanted to do. At some point I thought as I left school, surveying was a thing that I thought might fit. I had a job as with a surveyor to sort of work that out, but didn't really like that. And anyway, I quit that and then just hung out with mates and spent a year, doing what you do when you're 18.
And what do you do when you're 18?
I drink a lot, have fun, party and all that. So at some point along the line, I discovered a career called industrial design, which is product design. It's a bit like architecture for products. Every product that's out there that we use has had an industrial designer look at it. Lots of aesthetics and function and ergonomics and the practical things, how things work. So that sounded like a really good thing. So the second year I was in Melbourne, I decided that I wanted to get into this industrial design course. There was one in Melbourne, there was one in Adelaide. I went and did a 12-month TAFE course, which was called a Foundation for Art and Design type of thing. So because it was very difficult to get into this industrial design uni course. So I went and did this TAFE thing, and there was a bit of industrial design in there. There was a bit of sculpture, there was a bit of drawing and painting, all sorts. It was really cool. And anyway, I did really well in that, and then I applied. You could do this industrial design at RMIT in Melbourne or at UniSA in Adelaide. So I applied to both. I assumed I'd just stay in Melbourne, but I didn't get into the Melbourne one. I got into the Adelaide one. So then that got me over to South Australia.
How did you just come across industrial design? Because it's kind of left of centre. It's not your usual mainstream course. Were you creative in some way? Did you have that creative flair?
Yep. Always been creative. A family friend, it was a fellow who was a couple of years older than me. We had some camping trip or something, and he was chasing this industrial design thing, and so he introduced me to the thing, I suppose. To the concept. I mean, he didn't end up doing it. He turned into a winemaker anyway. That sounded like a thing. So
it only takes one person, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And at that age, who knows what you want to do? It's hard, isn't it? You're supposed to make these big life decisions when you're really young, and you've just got no idea.
Because both your parents were professionals, when you finished school and you didn't really know what you wanted to do, I mean, what type of influence did they have on your decision making or giving you some direction?
All the way through my childhood and through my schooling, they would basically say, look, as long as you're trying, that's all we care about. So there was no pressure to go any direction, really. They wanted me to find my passion. They wanted me to find what I wanted to do. And I suppose they also had 5 kids, so, they had a lot of other stuff to think about. So maybe I was just under the radar a little bit.
Just stay out of trouble, Tim. Stay out of trouble.
And I was the 4th child, so they're like, well, stay out of trouble, stay out of prison, and we'll be happy. Yeah. And
there was no inclination you wanted to go in with your dad into his business, into his practice?
No, that wasn't something at all, ever. Really.
Did any of the kids do that?
Yeah, my oldest sister and my youngest sister are both lawyers.
No one took up nursing?
Well, actually, my second older sister, she started nursing. She ended up doing occupational therapy. But yeah, she had a stint at nursing.
And at the end of the day, in Mildura, did your father make quite a successful career out of having a practice in Mildura?
I think it went really well for a while, but something went pear-shaped in the end, so it didn't end well financially. I think a lot of the work that Dad was doing was a lot of family law, and there was some legislation that got changed, which meant that basically most of the work that he was doing wasn't required anymore, or there was some change in the legal system.
So when did that all happen once you had...
This happened when I was just sort of finishing school, I guess.
And did he or the family talk about it with all of you, or was it something just sort of swept under the carpet?
Yeah, it was... we're certainly aware of it. I was sort of down there in school thinking, this is obviously costing something. Is that a problem? And they got me through, I suppose. But no, they ended up having to sell the house, and financially it was quite bad, I think.
Yeah, and what did they do in Melbourne to recover from that?
My father, he was a solicitor, he'd always wanted to be a barrister. To be a barrister, you've got to do these couple of years of articles, I think they call it, which is like a sort of an apprenticeship sort of thing. So by the time he finished uni, I think he had 3 kids. So they had their first. My older sister was when they were 20. He finished uni, had to go to work. Didn't have time to go and do a couple of years of this articles thing, which wouldn't really generate any money. So he never did that. So he always wanted to do that. So he went back, when he went back to Melbourne, he did that and he became a barrister. He spent the last 10 or 15 years of his working life being a barrister in Melbourne.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he picked himself up, brushed himself off and became quite successful in his own right anyway. Like a second chance, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And when you look at him doing that, I mean, does that sort of shape how you approach business in any way? If you get
maybe. I mean, you're always on the edge of possible, possibly something going bad, aren't you? Like you're sort of, I mean, that's the exciting thing about running a business is when things go well, it's really good, but they can turn pretty quickly too. So you're always on the edge. You can't be complacent. You've got to be a couple of steps ahead and, hopefully make the right decisions and be clever about it and work hard, and you do all that, you get the rewards. But there's always the rewards there because the risk is there, and the
definitely the higher the risk, the higher the reward, they say.
That's right. Yeah. Look, I'd never thought about it, but certainly I'm aware that things can go wrong. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your career. We got to the point where you got into university in Adelaide, hence that is why you're in South Australia. So you went into industrial design.
So I did, industrial design was 4 years, so I did that. I don't know if it was perhaps just the stage in life that I was at, but turned up in Adelaide. I thought, this place is fantastic. The weather was, after Melbourne, I mean, a dreary old depressing place it is. Adelaide was just, the sun was shining, everyone was happy. I moved into one of the university colleges, St Anne's, which was fantastic. Lots of young people, everyone, happy and, on the cusp of straight out of school and into adulthood sort of thing. I loved Adelaide from day one. Not a massive fan of cities, but I like the bush and wilderness, the countryside. And that was so far away from anything in Melbourne. You'd have to travel a long way to get to any sort of wilderness. Where it seemed to me Adelaide Hills were just there. And I remember doing a couple of trips up to the sort of Outback, the Flinders and Lake Eyre and all these places. It was just magic. So I thought it was a fantastic place to be living.
Did you finish your degree?
Yep.
And what was your first job?
Stratco. Shed builder. They had a sort of a R&D department where they employed engineers and industrial designers. So I got a job there, worked there for sort of 4 years. But yeah, it wasn't really my thing.
Why wasn't it? What was wrong with it?
The lifestyle around the working. It
dawned on
me
life.
that you've only got 4 weeks of holiday a year. You've got to go to work every day, and it was like this was sort of a little bit depressing. You just do that until you die? I don't know.
What did you do after that then? If you left Stratco, what did you do?
Well, they say if you find a job you like, you never work a day in your life, sort of thing. I was very keen to find a job that I liked because I didn't really like that. And look, at some point I thought that maybe travel was a thing. And because I like travel, so could you work in that? I had a holiday over to New Zealand. I was a very keen outdoorsy adventure sort of fella, so I was into rock climbing, and I went and did this mountaineering course in the Tasman Glacier down at Mount Cook in New Zealand.
Is this your first time overseas, or have you been before?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So we went up into the mountains for 10 days and we had these guides with us. And I looked at them and I thought, geez, man, look at these guys. They're out here. They're getting paid. They're in the mountains doing what they love. Surely, this is the sort of thing I need to be doing, But knew nothing about, mountains. Clearly I was on a beginner's course. But I'd done lots of travel through the Outback and I thought, well, maybe I can get some sort of guiding job in Australia. So I came straight back and I went to the youth hostel, the YHA in Adelaide, and there was a bunch of brochures for these Outback tours. And I picked up one and I rang a fella and he ran these 10-day trips from Adelaide to Alice Springs, sort of like a backpacker tour. So I rang him and said, look, how do I get a job? He said, oh, come and have a chat. And we had a chat, and a month or so later he said, look, I'm doing a trip next week. You want to come and give it a crack? So that was it. So I quit my job and went and did that. I've done lots of tours since then, but your first ones stay with you. But I just remember, it was about day 7 of this trip in the troopy full of young people. We were camped on a red sand dune with a view over sort of Uluru, watching the sunset just out in the scrub. You can't camp out there anymore, by the way. I was sitting there and I thought, I cannot believe that you can get paid for this. I cannot believe how good this is, and that you could possibly have a job doing this. And, you know, I knew that this is it. This is what I need to be doing.
So how long did you do that before you decided to go out on your own?
Well, I worked for that fella for 6 months. Along the way, I met Bianca. So Bianca jumped on the bus as a young Dutch backpacker at some point. That was, so that was great.
And that was it.
That was great. So she ended up working for this fella in the office and I was off doing tours.
So it was that one trip that you met her and she was just backpacking around Australia at that point.
Yeah.
And she decided to stay with you on that trip?
We fell in love pretty quick, I suppose. You know, it happened when you know, you know. So I obviously had this job which involved me going away. She was in Adelaide anyway, so she said, well, I'll stay in Adelaide and wait for you to come back from every trip. Anyway, she got a job with a fella who the same business. After 6 months, I guess, she was her visa was up. Her working visa was up. She needed to go back home. And so it's like, why don't you come? Yeah, okay then. Where do you live? Holland. All right. That sounds like fun. Let's go. So then we went back there. So I spent a year in Holland living with Bianca and her family and meeting all her friends and discovering all this Dutch stuff, which was cool. Then we came back for another year or so in Australia, and then we both worked up in Alice Springs. I worked for a different tour operator. She worked for a tour operator who was doing horse rides, so she was guiding horse ride sort of tours, I suppose. And then we got the travel bug again. So we took off for another year. We went over to Canada, sort of worked in the snow for a bit, and went back to Holland for a few months and did some more work there, and we just travelling around.
Oh, wow.
And then eventually, the whole time, always been very keen to start my own thing. So eventually we came back here and said, let's start a travel business. And that was in 98, I think.
What led you to the Clare Valley then?
Well, so we were living in Adelaide. We started the business in 98. We got married in 99 and our first child was born in 2000. So things were pretty busy. In the back of my mind, I'd always assumed that I'd not be living in the city, but living in a country. Actually, at one point I was dead set keen to go and live in the middle of the Outback. I thought that would be cool, but thankfully I didn't do that. But
so what stopped you from doing that?
Not being able to afford a cattle station or something.
Oh, that bit. Okay, yeah, that's fair enough.
There's that bit, and you can't. I would have been happy with a few acres, but they're not available either, really. No. I remember looking. We were always looking for stuff. Anyway, so we'd sort of said, well, look, certainly by the time kids go to school, we really need to be settled somewhere so they can have some obviously consistent schooling. And where's that going to be? We were open to options. We looked a lot around the Adelaide Hills. It was quite expensive there, really. And I'd spent a bit of time in Clare. I had a mate here we used to sort of hang out with a little bit. So I was familiar with the place. Phil Stanway.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, a block came up here. And at this block we're on now, we thought, gee, that looks good. Well, it was cheap compared to Adelaide Hills stuff. So we managed to get ourselves a bit of a mortgage and bought the land. And that was in 2000 we bought the land. And then took us 4 years, I guess, to get organised to build a house and move up here.
So it was in Adelaide when you started Travelwild Australia, your own business. Let's talk about how you set up that business. And okay. I presume you took from the experience that you got from working for other people and formulated your own structure. So tell us about that. Well,
it's not really that hard to start a tour business. All you need really is a vehicle and the ability to...
And knowledge,
a bit of knowledge and the ability to... You've got to sell, you've got to convince people to jump in this vehicle with you and head off into the Outback. And that all seemed quite easy. It's obviously very difficult, but you've got no idea when you're sort of starting out and you're young. Didn't really know it was impossible, so we just sort of tried it anyway. Our dream, or my dream, was to have a big Outback trip going from Adelaide all the way to Darwin, like a big 20-day type of overland sort of thing, That's what I really wanted to do. However, when we started, it was the start of summer, and no one obviously wants to go up into the Outback at summertime. And we knew a few of the people in the people who owned hostels in Adelaide. Lots of hostels back then in Adelaide. They all seemed to have disappeared, but there was plenty of them. And they all sold travel. They were sort of like your agent, basically. So that's where you got your passengers from as a tour operator. And there was one fella who was running tours on Kangaroo Island, and he was really busy, but no one liked him. From some business relationship thing, I think he'd rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way sort of thing. So they said, we sell this guy, but we really don't like selling this guy. So if you start on Kangaroo Island, we'll sell you. And we said, never really thought about Kangaroo Island. And they said, well, get yourself over there and we'll send you people. So that's what we did. We set up a little 3-day Kangaroo Island tour, and our very first trip was full.
Wow.
Which was lucky because we'd completely run out of money. So we'd bought a 4-wheel drive, a little troopy. We'd bought some swags and, some pots and pans and other stuff you need to go off and do a camping tour. And we just had enough money to pay for everyone's ferry and literally had about $20 left over on the first trip from all our sort of savings and stuff that we had. Yeah, thankfully the very first trip was full, which meant we had some income. If it wasn't, it would have been over pretty quick probably. It was a 3-day tour, so we must have done 2 a week, I suppose. Just sort of back to back.
Sounds exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah. Bianca was in Adelaide, running around to all the hostels, organising stuff, selling stuff. I was sort of permanently on the island, sleeping in the back of the car between tours. Yeah, working absolute ring off, like really, just constantly. Anyway, finally got to the end of the season, so I came back home and was like, all right, how much money did we make? And Bianca's like, yeah, not really any. Yeah. Oh. What happened there? Oh, I don't think we charged enough. Really? So this cost more than we thought, and that's cost more than we thought. And yeah.
Did you have kids at this point?
Yeah. Hang on. Did we? No.
Okay.
No, not far off. Yeah.
So from that experience, how did you change things and where did you go after that?
Well, I started charging a little bit more.
Yeah, that's good. Just out of curiosity, how much were you charging back in those days?
I don't know, a couple $100 or something for a 3-day tour or something.
Okay.
Yeah. So, the end of that summer, it's like, right, let's crank up this big 20-day expedition we want to do. And that was a lot harder. We did them and we sold seats. But yeah, that was significantly harder to do. And
why was that?
Well, it's 20 days. It's a lot of money. It's a big commitment. People have got to be really into it to want to do it, whereas a little 2 or 3 day Kangaroo Island trip, it's like if it's something they don't like, then that's okay. They'll move on. They'll go on. It's only 3 days of their life. Whereas 20 days, it's like you really have to be committed. So you're relying on those agents to sell you to the backpacker hostels. We really had no competition at that time on Kangaroo Island, only this other fella that no one liked. But we had competition on that trip, including the guy that I used to work for who was doing this Adelaide to Alice sort of stuff.
How did he feel about you coming in and competing against him?
Yeah, he was pretty shitty. But we're sort of friends and we've worked together since. So yeah, that's all right. But that happens. It's happened to me.
It's the nature of the industry.
Yeah. You've always got to be prepared for that and make sure you're doing a better job than that fella. Yeah.
So when you're doing these 20-day tours, how often were you doing these tours?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's 20 days up and then you've got to drive back over 4 or 5 days and then you turn around and go again.
The following week?
Oh, I can't remember what the schedule was, but probably, yeah.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, we probably had one a month or something we scheduled. And by the time I was doing those, Bianca's got Joey, a newborn, on her hip and I'm off. See you later.
I'm off to travel.
Yeah.
Have fun.
Yeah. So that wasn't really sustainable.
Okay, so how long did you do that for? And did you make any money from that?
We must have been making some money. Yeah, we got a bit smarter about, charging a bit more, I guess. Look, at some point as more children arrived, it became obvious that, I can't be out there doing tours all the time. So the only option really to stay in that business was to grow the business and then start employing people to go and run the tours. And I could have more of a management role and then I could have a 9-to-5 job and I could be around and help with all the other stuff that needed doing. We tried to grow the business. We had a couple of the people who worked for us wanted to buy into the business, so we sold a bit of the business to a couple. So we had 3 of us in the company, I guess. That didn't end well in the end. So
okay, just dynamics.
A few challenges came along. There was, I'm not sure, remember the GFC. That was a thing. There was some insurance crisis where everyone's insurance went up multiple times. We started to get more competition, and there was 3 of us all trying to run the thing. We just couldn't keep the thing big enough to sustain 3 of us in the office, I guess. So I think that biggest point we had 9 vehicles and 18 tour guides, something like that. running around. We were doing KI, we were doing Flinders trips, we were doing Adelaide to Alice. It got really difficult, and at some point we said, some of us in the office here have to go back out and start doing tours. And I didn't want to because I had 3 little babies at home. They sort of didn't want to either. So I guess in that scenario where if it's just yourself and shit hits the fan and you need to change things and you need to work harder, or you just do that. When there's 3 of you, you sort of, if only one of you does that hard work, then you sort of get resentful of the other ones. And so it's a really difficult sort of dynamic. You all have to really be on the same page. And in the end, I'd been in it 7 years or something. I was sort of just quite burnt out anyway. And I was actually keen to get out. So they bought me out. They continued to run it for a couple of years. And
what was the company called at that point?
Then it was called Travelwild.
Does that exist anymore?
No.
Okay.
No.
How was that whole experience, Tim?
Liberating. Yeah. I could see the model we had was going to fail. So someone had to get out.
How long had that model existed? Like how long had you all been in business for?
Really not that long. It was, I think I must have done 3 years. We did 3 years on my own, and then after 3 years they came in. So maybe we did 4 years with them. And then I think it was a total of 7 years. And then so that was the end of my tour operating days. We'd been working together with other tour operators up north to promote each other's products. So I had a good relationship with an operator who ran tours up at Uluru and another one in Kakadu. So I set up a little website to promote them and sell them as an agent. So I started doing that, and that started going really well. So then I was just sitting at my computer selling travel for a few years.
All right. And then what, you got itchy feet and decided, I need to get back out there again, or?
Yep. So it was my customer acquisition channel was 100% Google. So I learned how to do SEO, search engine optimization, and I was really, really good at it. And
so you just taught yourself? I
just taught myself, and I was ranking, number 1 for Kakadu tours, Kimberley tours, Ayers Rock tours, Uluru tours, Fraser Island tours, all this sort of stuff. And I had all these websites selling all those tours, and I had one called Kimberley Tours as well, a website, Kimberley Tours website. So I was ranking number 1 for the keyword Kimberley Tours, and I was selling onto a Kimberley operator called Kimberley Adventure Tours, and I was their number 1 agent. As you do when you're a tour operator, you're always having problems with your vehicles, especially operating somewhere rough like the Kimberley. Your wheels are falling off and all sorts of roads are flooded and all sorts. There's always something. Anyway, one of their guys had an accident, and then he had another one like a month later or something like that. Nothing serious, but just total overload in trying to fix the problem sort of thing. So they were both teachers, so this was a part-time sort of gig for them, the tours. And so they said, look, they rang me up and said, look, we're not operating next year. We're closing it down because it's just too hard. I thought, well, that sucks because I'm selling a lot of product onto it, a lot of tours onto it. So I was earning sort of some quite good commission. But I was acutely aware too that everything that I was getting was from Google. And I know that Google every now and then changes their algorithm. And I thought, if Google ever doesn't rank us number 1 on that first page anymore, if something happens and we disappear down everything's gone. I get like someone will turn the tap off. I won't get any sales at all. So I said to them, look, maybe I'll take on that Kimberley tour, because I thought, well, that's a bit of a backup. I know how to operate. I can start doing that. If the Google stuff ever falls off, then I've got this tour. So I took it on, and lo and behold, about 3 months later, Google flicked a switch and all that business was gone. I was now on page 4 or something for all those keywords.
Can't you just change your keywords and get back on the top tier again? Not as simple as that.
It's not as simple as that, but you can. So look, it's really complex. So I mean, the way back then, the way that you would rank well is you had to sort of do little tricks, and the tricks weren't really seen by Google as a legitimate way to rank. So they became aware of those tricks, and then they changed their algorithm and they started penalising the people who'd been using those tricks, you see. So
wow.
You sort of almost got blacklisted. So basically I was an operator again, and all I had was the Kimberley. So I set about to here we go. I'll start operating again and started building that business. And so we've still got the Kimberley Adventure Tours. It's our main sort of thing now.
But you've broadened far beyond that now. So you're called Travelwild Australia. So you've got the Kimberley Adventure Tours. What other tours have you got going?
So we've pre-COVID we had a tour that went from Perth to Broome, sort of linked into the Kimberley. That was West Adventure Tours. So we sort of still got that little brand. And we've got another one called Heading Bush Adventures, which is the guy that I originally started working for, where I met Bianca. That was his. So at some point 8 years ago or something, we bought that business from him. And we've also got some Clare Valley stuff now, which is quite new. It's only since COVID that we started doing that. So we've got a little brand we call Clare Valley Wine Tours, where we do day tours around sort of Clare, like a premium sort of upmarket, luxury type of little day tour. And we've also been working on a side project with a bunch of other people. This walking trail that's around Clare, the Clare Valley Wine and Wilderness Trail. Sort of on the back of that, we've started doing walking tours as well. So we've branded that the Clare Valley Walk. Our main things are our two little brands in the Clare Valley and the Kimberley.
Okay.
So that's enough.
And how has the walking tours taken off? That's a whole new market, isn't it, really?
That is a new market, and that's not something that I'd had a lot of experience with. Through COVID, I ended up, there was a walking operator who needed a South Australian-based tour guide. Their tour guide who they were sending over from Melbourne couldn't get here. Remember all that border business? And so somehow someone got onto me and I went and started doing some guiding. So that opened my eyes to the whole walking tour genre, which is really, really quite interesting. We cranked up that, yeah.
Has it been busy?
Yeah, we've just been playing around the last couple of years, so just testing it to see how it goes. And this year we've gone pretty hard. So we've put out a lot of departures for this year, and we've got a lot of interest. Yeah, there's heaps of people wanting to come and lots of inquiries.
And where are they coming from?
Mostly East Coast. Yeah, yep. Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. Lots of groups. The demographic is, people in their, semi-retired, in their 50s, 60s sort of age, still active, but not really working full time anymore. Lots of groups of friends, groups of girls, lots of groups of girls getting together and coming into a weekend sort of thing. And the Clare Valley is just perfect for it because you've got that walking component, but you've also got all the food and the wine.
And I guess also with COVID, you had to pivot. Like you said, you went into the walking side of things. But how did COVID affect the business because of all that interstate work that you do? How did you cope with all that?
Look, it was absolutely devastating. However, it was an opportunity. So we changed things. We basically, we essentially went broke, I suppose. There was no business. We had all these vehicles, big trucks that were up north that were just parked, left. They had all finance on them that still needed to be paid. Thankfully got all that government assistance, which got us through. But they say you should work on your business, not in your business. We'd spent a lot of time working in the business. And the Kimberley product that we had grown and it evolved into something that actually, honestly, we didn't really like. We had these big trucks just packing people in, swag strapped to the roof, off you'd go, and a bit of a bush trip. I mean, they were fun trips, but it was sort of, you end up compromising a bit here and there. It certainly wasn't the sort of trip that I'd want to go and do. And, being stuck in a bus, some people like it, I suppose. It was taking so much energy to run this tour because you've constantly got mechanical issues with these big trucks. Whatever vehicle you've got, they're always breaking up there. So I just dread the phone call. The sat phone would come up on your mobile from one of the guides, and I'm going, oh God, what's wrong now? And it's like, oh, we've lost a wheel, or there's this, or there's broken a spring, and then of course you've got 20 people sitting on the side of the Gibb River Road. You've got a truck that's not going anywhere. You've got to solve it. So you just stop everything and you work your butt off for the next couple of days to get it all fixed. And whether that's sourcing some spring from Brisbane and getting it on a next flight to Kununurra, which is a couple of grand, and then finding someone in Kununurra to take the spring. It's just mad.
So how often did this happen?
All the time.
Oh.
Every couple of weeks sort of thing. It was crazy because you've got enough trucks. And so I said, I'm not doing that anymore. People say, oh, it sounds great taking trips out in the Kimberley. It's like, I wasn't doing that. I was sitting here just as stressed as anything trying to solve these problems, putting out fires, Through COVID, we had a lot of time to think about what we were doing. It was like, I'm not doing that anymore. But we've got this great Kimberley brand and we've got all this investment or whatever in the Kimberley, and that's what else we're going to do. So we created a new product, which we run now, which is tag-along tour, where we've got a lead vehicle. We have two staff in it. Then we supply Land Cruisers with a camper thing on the back for the guests. If you're going to a Kimberley tour, you're flying to Broome like you did back in the day, but instead of us putting you on a big truck, we give you a 4-wheel drive and we go in a convoy for 10 days, do a big lap of the Kimberley. We've secured all these beautiful campsites on station country, which is absolutely magic. It's so nice. 30 years ago, you could drive along the Gibb River Road and just pull off and camp anywhere, follow creeks and tracks and stuff. You can't do that anymore. It's all locked up. Nowadays, everyone gets fed into these massive campgrounds with generators and people, and there's this sort of imagined campsite, Kimberley campsite, that you can see yourself on, which is next to a waterhole by a boab tree or something, with no one around. It's not. The reality is it's not like that anymore.
Oh, really?
It is for us because we've done the work to secure those spots, but it's really hard.
I mean, was there any other tour guides doing that already? That you
no,
got that up? So you were the first one to actually come up with that.
Yeah, as far as I know.
Okay.
Yeah. Look,
That's
so
awesome.
I've always been creative.
Has it paid off?
Yeah, it has. Yeah. Last year we did 7 departures. Each departure had 6 vehicles, 42 sort of laps of the Kimberley, and we did a couple of tyres and a bolt fell out of a shock absorber. That was the maintenance issues for the whole trip. If I did 42 trucks around the Kimberley, 20 of them would have broken down. The initial idea behind this model was to reduce maintenance. So your Land Cruiser, obviously, hardly anything ever goes wrong with those things. They're fantastic. They're smaller. They're not as heavy. We've also got multiple vehicles. So if we do have a problem, we haven't got people stuck on the side of the road. We can take those people and put them in one of the other vehicles. Because it's just a Land Cruiser, we can go and rent something from Kununurra to get them through if we need to, whereas you can't go and rent these trucks. So the impetus was to create something which absolutely minimised the potential mechanical challenges that you might face.
So the trucks are gone?
Trucks are gone.
Altogether? Okay.
Altogether. I drive along now and in Adelaide, I stop at the traffic lights next to some sort of truck, like a dump truck or something, and I think, some poor bugger owns that. I hate them.
How many people are working for you now?
It's mostly me and Bianca, and we've got a local fella who does most of the wine tours, and I've got a girl, Nicole, who sort of does a lot of admin. She's based in Perth. She works from home in Perth. So there's four in the business, really, sort of. We're not going up to the Kimberley this year. We're going to stay here and do these walking trips, but I've got a couple who are going up to the Kimberley in about a month to do all those trips. So there's a bit of casual stuff that comes in when it gets busy. I mean, the Kimberley's fantastic. It's one of those things, the harder it is, the more rewarding it is, sort of thing. So the Kimberley's a bit like that. But certainly these Clare trips, it's nice to be able to sleep in your own bed, which doesn't happen in the Kimberley.
But out of everything that you have achieved, and Bianca, we should mention that it's a joint thing.
Yes.
And wish Bianca was here to put her 2 cents in, but she's off doing her thing. What's probably been the biggest challenge you both had to go through?
For any travel business, COVID was huge. And I've got mates who didn't make it. They broke, lost the house, lost everything.
What are you super proud of out of everything that you've done?
Oh, well, I'm super proud of the business that we've built, been able to maintain for all these years. I'm super proud of the feedback that we get. We work really hard to create these fantastic experiences. That's borne out in the great reviews that we get, I suppose.
That's awesome.
People genuinely enjoy and love the experiences that we create. And so that's really rewarding, and it's being financially successful. Not talking things up, massively here, but we managed to pay the bills and pay the mortgage and bring up a family and all that sort of stuff. So it's sustained us, which is great. And money's great, but having an impact on people's lives is perhaps better. I don't know. Like when I was doing the travel selling, after I sold the business and I had a few stint for a year where I was just selling travel, I was selling heaps and I was making really good money. but it was just like flat. There was nothing. It was like it was just clipping the ticket as it goes through, and it just wasn't inspiring. I wasn't a part of anyone's anything. It was really quite bland. You need a bit of a spice, I suppose. And I think an unhappy, fulfilling life, really, it seems to come from being able to help other people, really, doesn't it?
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, definitely.
So it's fantastic that we've been able to be a small part in creating these really special experiences for lots of people over the years.
And when you reflect back on your early years, doing the Alice Springs as well as the KI trips with your few pots and pans and your profit of $20,
yeah,
and doing what you're doing now, do you just go, wow, oh, so proud of myself.
Well, it's took a while, like when through COVID, we, eventually we sort of said, okay, we've got to start again, but this time we know what we're doing. Whereas last time we had no idea. I've tried 100 different ways to run a tour business, and I've worked out that none of those work. You learn a lot. So I finally sort of got to the point where I can feel like I can be a little bit smarter about the decisions that you make.
At any point in time, did you have a thought of, oh man, nah, this is it. Just put it to bed and I'm going to do something else? Did that ever cross your mind?
It crossed Bianca's mind a lot. Probably still does. But I honestly, what am I going to go do? Pack shelves in Woolies or something? I don't know. That's a great job, and someone's got to do it, but it's not for me. I just don't. I just don't know what I'd do. I know how to do this, and sometimes it can be really stressful, but it can be really rewarding too. I just don't know what else I'd do.
So where do you see the business in 5 years' time? What's the ultimate benchmark you're aiming for?
So probably back in the day, I was quite keen to take over the world and have some international thousands of tours all over the planet type of thing. So I've got beyond that. I'm sort of quite happy with where things are at the moment. I'm really enjoying the walking sort of side of things, and as good as the Kimberley is, maybe at some point we'll try and move that on to someone else perhaps or something, and then just focus on the local stuff.
Before I actually finish up, how has Bianca value added to this whole experience?
We haven't spoken much, obviously. We've mentioned her a couple of times, but she's integral to the whole thing. She's been on board since day one. For most of her career, she's also had another job somewhere else. Now she's sort of just doing the business stuff. So for most of her life, she's been going to work some full-time job, then coming home, then doing the books for Travelwild, in between, raising kids and all this, everything that's involved in that. So we balance each other really well. She's very conservative. She's not a risk taker at all. She's an accountant. I'm sort of the opposite. I'm happy to take risks all over the joint. We've probably taken less risks than I would have taken, but we've taken more than she would have taken. So we've met in the middle. And I push her to take some risks, and she'll reluctantly sort of do that, and sometimes she'll pull me back the other way and say, look, that's just it's crazy talk. What are you doing? Like I do, she really enjoys that part of the business, which revolves around helping people have a great time, I suppose.
Tim, congratulations, and thank you so much for speaking to me on the Voice It podcast.
That's all right. Hopefully it was interesting. Anyway, we'll see.
I found all that so fascinating. Not sure it makes me want to start a tour company though, but you can tell Tim has a real passion for travel and gets an absolute kick out of giving people the best experience, and he obviously does it really well. Congrats to Tim and Bianca. All that hard work has certainly paid off. Also, Tim is partly behind the fabulous Wine and Wilderness Trail that was developed back in 2020 alongside Michael Nugent, who's the main man behind it. There's 105 kilometres of trail mazing through private landholders' paddocks, rolling hills and vineyards, leading visitors to cellar doors and restaurants. A fantastic project bringing more tourists to the Clare Valley. 1,200 people walked the trail last year, and if you haven't walked a stretch of this trail, you're missing out. To find out more about Tim and Bianca's tour company and the tourism products they offer, head to my show notes for the links, plus all the details of the Wine and Wilderness Trail. Please share this episode on socials to all your family and friends, and please review if you have a chance. I always enjoy reading the reviews and your recommendations for future guests. Next up, you'll hear from the owner of a fabulous new business that's opened its doors in the valley. It's the Clare Valley Distillery, which has been kickstarted by Catherine Vincent or Catherine Nugent or Carks. But there's so much more to Carks than meets the eye. Follow this podcast so you don't miss the next episode drop. Just before I sign off, a little bit about me and my business, Voice It. It's a communications business specialising in public speaking training, media training, podcasting, audio memoir production and MC work. I'm passionate about giving people the skills to be effective, engaging and memorable communicators, not just on stage, but in life, in general conversation. I'm a former ABC broadcast journalist and also have 12 years experience in AMB speech and drama. I use those skills to bring you engaging and fun workshops and recording sessions to make you feel at ease and enjoy the process, because I get it. Public speaking can be daunting, but it doesn't have to be. That's enough about me. I'm Annabelle Homer. I'll catch you very soon for another episode of the Voice It podcast.